Hi, everyone, and welcome to No More Headaches, Mixing and Managing Your Audio, brought to you by the Podcast Academy. I'm super pumped here today. We are a new membership organization where all individuals join. You can find us on Twitter at Podcast Academy. You can find us on LinkedIn. I put a link in the chat and will again later. And we have launched membership between now and the end of September. It's only $50 to join, so we encourage you to join. You'll get access to these webinars, many of which will be available for members only after October 1st. You'll get access to the mentorship program, which just launched this week, and we have over 150 people paired up to mentor. It's very exciting. All right, I don't want to take all the time saying anything. I'm Michelle Cobb, the Executive Director of the Podcast Academy, but I'd like to turn it over to our fantastic webinar leaders here. We have Michael Raphael. Now, of course, I practice so much, and I hope I got
Raphael.
Raphael, right. I practiced, I asked, and I still got it wrong.
It sort of looks like a pump, feels like a sneaker.
Exactly. I even wrote it down and didn't follow my own pronunciation. Michael Raphael, who has worked on the production teams for The New Yorker, Radio Hour, Studio 360 with Kurt Anderson, Marketplace, Weekend America, and Radio Lab. He is 1/3 of the audio storytelling, post-production, and consultation group Final V2. And he's joined by Rob Byers, who's the Director of Broadcast and Media Production at American Public Media, and his work there contributed to a podcast and a Pulitzer. He is also 1/3 of the Audio Storytelling Post-Production and Consultation Group. You'll hear it again, Final V2. I'm going to turn things over to them, and you will stop seeing me for a moment. I'll be back when we're ready to take some Q&A. Just a reminder, if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A box, not the chat, which zooms by so quickly. All right, take it away, Rob and Michael.
Thank you very much. Michael, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Awesome, great. Thanks, everybody. It is really great to see so many people coming through and telling us where you are. I'm seeing a lot of names I recognize, and I'm seeing places, you are coming from places all over the world. This is really cool to see. First, I'm gonna start off with an apology. It is raining here in Minneapolis pretty heavily, and if it sounds like someone's throwing pebbles against my window as we do this, that's what it is. It's the rain over there on the window. So what are we gonna do today? Let's talk through that real quick. We are going to talk about 5 things. First, we're going to talk about how to organize your audio sessions. Secondly, we're going to give you some tips to help make mixing a little easier. For a lot of us, mixing can be really tedious, and we've got some ideas to help you kind of speed things up and speed things along. Third, we're going to talk about 3 common mixing problems, and these are 3 things that Michael and I run into on a regular basis, and we know you do too, so it'll be helpful for you to have solutions to those problems. We're also going to talk about just organizing your stuff. How do you keep your audio projects organized so you can find things quickly, even 15, 20 years down the road? How are you going to find things later on down the road? And then finally, we're going to give you some quick tips on how to make your storage, your file storage, your audio storage a little easier. So let's jump right in. And this is a Pro Tools session. And I'm going to use Pro Tools here as an example as we talk through session organization and then fixing some of these common problems. But what I'm going to offer to you applies to any DAW that you might use. So if you've got Pro Tools, that's great. If you've got Audition or Hindenburg or even something else, everything we're going to talk about today is applicable to any DAW that you use. So if you don't have Pro Tools, don't worry about it. It's just what Michael and I happen to use. So session organization. How should you organize your audio sessions? I take a real simple approach here. And when I think of session organization, I think top down and I think left to right. Okay, so what we're looking at right here is again, a Pro Tools session, and this is actually a criminal session. This is a session from the Criminal podcast, and I think even the executive producer, Lauren Sporer, is on the webinar with us, so that's really cool to see. Hi, Lauren. So let's talk top down first, and then we'll talk left to right. So top down, I'm going to organize things host, then other voices, and then music or ambi, field tape, that kind of thing. So in this particular session here, I'm just going to highlight the tracks that I'm talking about. These first 4 tracks, these are all host tracks. These are the host in the studio reading the script or reading the narration. For you, it might be a slightly different thing. It might be a reporter. You might be the reporter, but it's whoever that lead voice is. And for a lot of the work that Michael and I do, we do narrative work. So a lot of the time, most of the time, that is a host in the studio. So host first. Next, we have all of the interview tape. So this is guests, people we're talking to, the host is talking to, interviewing. This might be field tape. This might be archival tape as well. We'll do that next. And then finally, we'll throw all the music last, okay? And we're doing this, the session organization is really important because it's easy to get lost. This session's 30 minutes long. We work on sessions sometimes that are almost an hour long, right? So it's easy to get kind of lost, and it's much better if you always put things in the same place and you always know where they are, right? So top down, host, guests and other voices, and then music. We also have to organize left to right, okay? So the music that I have highlighted here on the screen is a great example of organizing left to right. As you can see, the music as it comes in, song 1, song 2, song 3 there, they're all cascading left to right, okay? So the first song that comes in, the first piece of music that we use, it's at the top of the music section and it's all the way on the left, okay? Makes sense? It would not make sense in my mind for this very first song to be all the way at the bottom down here, right? And then, then they get all mixed and matched, and it doesn't really work so well. So what you end up doing is you end up with this nice kind of cascading effect, and it's really evident here in the music, but you can also see it here in our guests too. This JB guest, they come in first, which means they're obviously going to be on the left side of the session. That's where they have to be, just in the timeline. But we've also moved them up to the top of the guest session. And then the next piece of tape here, this is a different voice. Every voice is on its own track. This different voice then is the next one down and off to the right. And things kind of start to cascade down left to right. And in a sense, you can kind of look at this, when you organize top down and left to right, it's kind of like reading a book, right? If you're reading a book in English, you're reading top down and left to right.
What Rob is presenting here is a way to organize yourself. And we do this every single time. And I bring that up because we also work from a template. And it's a step that we'd highly recommend you set up for yourself. We have a number of different projects that we work on and we collaborate on. And we actually have a template that has a tremendous amount of tracks, depending on what we're working on, but all of them are set up with all the plugins we typically use, all the routing we typically use, and it saves us a tremendous amount of time. Think about it like setting all your ingredients out before you start cooking. You don't want to go into whether it's Pro Tools or whatever DAW you have, and have to constantly click and find all the things you're going to use for a project every single time. So take the time, build yourself a template in whatever software you're using, and just repeat it every time. It's that repeatability that's going to keep you organized and save you a tremendous amount of time.
That's really true. So,
yeah.
Sorry, Michael, go ahead.
No, good.
I was going to say a few people have asked in the Q&A already, why do we have different tracks if it's one host, why do we have different tracks? Each of these tracks represents a different tracking session. So odds are all 4 of these tracks were recorded on 4 different days or 4 different occasions. And the host might have eaten something a little different today for lunch, and the voice sounds a little different, or they're just a little further away or a little closer to the mic. And so in the mix, we'll compensate for that and try to make them sound the same.
But the just the last note on the template, it's a way for us to keep our mixing organized and straightforward. And I think some of the next steps we're going to talk about that Rob is going to start with is sort of an extension of that idea.
Yeah. So I'll throw a little caveat here and say that we're not going to mix this session top to tail. But what I want to try to do is offer everyone just a few tips to try to take the tedium out of your mixing. So I'm going to make some assumptions here that the folks that you are able to mix your episode now, and you've got some facility making level adjustments and trying to get things kind of consistent. But maybe you're finding it a little tedious and you want to kind of speed things up a little bit. So the first tip I will offer you when mixing is to get yourself a loudness meter. I really like using loudness meters. I've talked about them at length in the past, and loudness meters are really great because they provide a perceptual measurement. So the meter kind of knows how you hear. It knows how your ear responds to audio. And I'm sure we've all run into this issue where we're looking at a waveform, but what we hear doesn't really correspond to what we see in the waveform. The loudness meter helps you cut through that. And what you see on the loudness meter, odds are, is going to represent what your ear actually hears and perceives. So I'll offer a couple of things about loudness meters. First of all, this loudness meter is called Uline or Ulian. And Michelle, if you could throw that link into the chat that I provided you. This is the Ulian loudness meter, the YLM2. And you're going to get a link here in the chat in just a second. And this is free. This is a free loudness meter. It's pretty easy to use and to configure. And they have a $50 paid version where you can upgrade and get some extra features, and you can save presets and all that kind of thing. But I really like this. And one reason I really like this meter is because it's available and compatible with Pro Tools, with Audition, with Hindenburg. So it does AAX and it does VST. And I think it also does AU plugins. So those 3 things are 3 different kinds of plugins. So this is a great one. Another one that Michael and I use is the Insight loudness meter from Isotope. And I've used this for a couple of years. I really like this one as well. It offers a whole bunch of other features that a standalone meter doesn't, but it's a great place to start. So highly recommend getting yourself a loudness meter. If you need a hand learning how to use the loudness meter, I wrote an article for Transom quite a few years ago now that's totally still applicable, and it'll walk you step by step why you should use a loudness meter and how you can use it. And Michelle, if you could put that second link I gave you in the chat, that's the link to the Audio Producer's Guide to Loudness on Transom, and that should really give you a hand. Okay, so that's the loudness meter, and we want to use a loudness meter because it provides a perceptual measurement.
Going back to Rob's session now that we've kind of gone through his deep love of loudness, which is a deep love of loudness, we want to talk about the order of operations, how we're going to tackle this mix. So just like Rob organized this session, it's going to be the order that we mix in. So as Rob was talking about before, we do a lot of narrative work, and 99% of what we do is dialogue heavy. And we typically have a primary voice in our work. And in this case, in the criminal example, it's Phoebe Judge. It's the host of our show in this example. So we're going to mix all of those tracks first. We'll go through all of the host tracks, get them balanced. If there needs to be any sort of matching going on between those 4 tracks, we're going to do that. But we're going to get her level just right. And then we're going to move on to our guest tracks and balance those tracks against those host tracks. mix all of those tracks. And then if there's field tape, we're going to get to the field tape and scene tape. And then once we've gotten through all of that, we save the music until last. But we're always kind of using that host track as the guide to balance everything else against.
So let's do this. Let's actually look at how we might achieve that. And I'm just going to scroll my window over a little bit here. Okay. So I want to point out a couple of things. Obviously, this is a session that has already been mixed. This is a final session. It's done, ready to go out the door and be delivered to the producers. But how should we mix? I think most of us are probably familiar with this idea of turning on the level automation, and you get this kind of rubber band and you make all the dots, regardless of the DAW you're using, you're doing something very similar to this. And this, for me, is really where the tedium comes in. As Michael said, when I mix Criminal, I always start with Phoebe's voice. And really doesn't matter what show I'm working on, I'm always going to start with the host voice. And the first thing I'm going to do is to try to get that voice consistent on the loudness meter, okay? For me, for this particular show, I'm going to mix it to -24 on the loudness meter. And that's the orange -24 here. I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but that's the orange -24 here on the loudness meter. I'm going to try to aim for that. And I'm just going to make minute level adjustments as I go through the track to get to that -24. And I want everything to be really consistent from clip to clip to clip to clip. Now, I'm going to mute my music. I'm going to probably mute the other guests. I'm going to mute any background ambi, and I'm just going to focus on that host track. So you can see here, there's a piece of music here, but it's muted right now. That's why that M is orange. So I'm only going to listen to the host track. Once I do that, I'm going to go in there and draw a bunch of dots. Now you are seeing way more dots than anyone needs to draw. And you're seeing way more dots because I actually use a hardware controller. It's a fader, my finger on a fader, and it's connected to the computer. And when I move the fader, it draws dots for me. It's a fancy piece of gear. I really like using it. You don't need it. So you don't need to have this many dots. I could achieve the same thing with about 8 dots. It's just a workflow thing, and I like using the fader. So let's take a quick listen here, and I want you to recognize something that's happening in between the relationship of what's being said and the movement of the lines. And let me make this a little bigger for folks. I'll zoom in a little bit. Okay, so we'll take a quick listen to this.
The woman came out with what police recorded as approximately 7 grams of marijuana. She'd done what the officers asked her to do, but something had gone wrong with the video recording. So they waited a few weeks, gave her $100 more, and drove her back to Julian Benton's house.
If you notice those dots, those changes that I've made, they are all changes to sentences and phrases. I haven't really made any changes to words or syllables, right? So I haven't gone through and found a particular consonant and drawn it down, or there's not a word here that I'm really tweaking out on and zooming in really far to draw around a word. When I mix, I'm leaving myself zoomed out a little ways. I'm only looking at sentences and phrases, and I'm mixing sentences and phrases. That sounds really natural. That's how we speak. We modulate our voice kind of in phrases and sentences. And it prevents me from getting really, really tweaky, right? If I zoom in really far, odds are I'm going to start to want to make changes to words and syllables. That in and of itself has saved me so much time, and it results in a really natural sound. So I'm making adjustments in sentences and phrases. I happen to have a lot of dots here. It's only because I'm using that fader. I'm not actually drawing those in by hand. And I'd really encourage you to mix in sentences and phrases and don't get caught up in drawing lots of dots. Okay, so once I've gone through and I've got all my host tracks or my one host track consistent around -24, and your target might change. You might use a different number to mix to, but I just happen to mix to that one for this show. Once I get the host kind of set, I'm going to use the host as my foundation for all the rest of my decisions in the mix, okay? I can use that to my advantage. If I find that looking at a loudness meter over here on the side of the screen is distracting, or it's hard for me to get used to, at this point in the mix process, I can start to use my ears and I can pull away from the loudness meter a little bit because I've got the host sitting at a nice fundamental level and I can balance everything else around that. So what I can do, and I'll just quickly demonstrate this, what I can do is I can listen to the end of one, I'm going to focus on transitions, okay? So the transition between this host clip and this guest clip that's about to come in down here, Julian. I'm going to focus on that transition and I'm going to listen to a little bit of the clip that I've already mixed, the host, and I'm going to let it play into Julian. And then I'm going to make a decision about what needs to happen with Julian's track. So it looks just like this.
They waited a few weeks, gave her $100 more, and drove her back to Julian Benton's house.
Well, I didn't expect her to come back and buy something. That was kind of strange that she came back and wanted to.
And I'd start to make adjustments to Julian. And I'm balancing Julian by ear to the clip that came before it. Once I have that balance in place, I'll let Julian play out. And I will get to the end of the Julian clip. And because the next host clip has already been mixed, because I remember I went through and I did all the host tracks first, as I get to the end of the Julian clip, I'm going to pay real close attention to what that transition sounds like. Is it consistent? Is it balanced?
Gave it to her that she was going to go to jail and lose her military benefits.
On the second visit, the woman bought a...
And in my ear, to my ear right now, that sounds pretty good. And I would move clip to clip of the guest tracks, not the ghost tracks, the guest tracks, doing that exact same procedure. So at this point in the mix, you can start to pull away from that loudness meter if you want to. You can certainly use it. I use it. I keep an eye on it all the time. You don't have to. You can use your ear.
Just to chime in with a point here, one thing I'd be careful of, and this is where the loudness meter can actually really help you, is that if you're working on a project for long hours, and we typically are, and you're under the crush of a deadline, take breaks. The reason why I bring that up is that when we start to get fatigued and our ears are fatigued, or if we're monitoring at too loud a level, whether it's our speakers or our headphones, you'll tend to mix louder and louder as time goes on, whether you realize it or not. You'll just push level. And having this meter is just a great way to check yourself as you work long into the evening, if that's your situation.
Yeah, totally. I'm seeing a bunch of questions pop into the chat here. We're gonna try to get to some of these at the end. So keep them coming, and we'll try to get to them. I will say I'm seeing a lot of questions about WaveWriter. WaveWriter is a plugin that will automate level adjustments for you. That's certainly something you can consider. Michael and I prefer to work by hand. We find that we get better results if we make these adjustments by hand. It takes a little bit more time, but we've gotten really efficient at it. And we find that the sounds we get doing this by hand in a natural way typically sounds better to our ear than using a plugin to do it for us. Okay, so the other point I wanted to make here is, at this point, we've gone through all of the voices, right? And like Michael was saying, for the sake of my ears, I might actually take a break at this point. I might come back tomorrow or later in the day. Once you get all the voices done, that's a really good kind of pause spot. The next thing I've got to do now is balance music or balance ambi against those voices. And at this point, I can completely back away from the loudness meter. You can do that because these are all creative choices, whether you're going to balance music against the voice, whether you're going to balance ambi against the voice. There's no right level. There's no number on the loudness meter that we need to hit with that music or with that ambi. Okay, it's all a creative choice, and it's all something that you can do and should do by ear. It's all about what sounds right to your ear. So I've often received this question: what level should my music be at? And the answer I have to give is it's the level that your ear tells you it should be, balanced against all the other voices. Depending on the kind of music it is, if it's hip hop or pop music, let's say, or something that's really strong and kind of in your face, that music might have to be a little lower compared to the voice than, say, a solo violin or jazz piano, which might need to be a little louder in relationship to the voice, right? It's not going to be a big difference, but there is going to be a difference there. And it's all going to depend on, in the moment, what your ear tells you in that section. It's also something to do with, pacing and sort of the style of the story you're trying to tell will influence how loud your music gets. There's one tip I want to offer here, which I think can be really helpful to folks. A lot of us have found, and I still run into this, a lot of us have found that you get that mix done and you listen to your mix in the car, or many of us may not be driving around these days, so maybe we're listening to our mix in earbuds. We're walking around the neighborhood, or we're on a commute. And we discover with all that background noise around us, all of a sudden we kind of lose the music, or we lose that background ambi. And we wish that we had mixed that music or ambi louder, right? There's a great trick you can use to solve this. And it was dubbed by a former NPR colleague, the rock and roll mixing trick. It's super simple. You listen back to the music and voice together, and you simply turn your listening level way down. So far down that you can still hear the voice and you can still understand what that voice is saying, but you've really got to kind of lean in to hear it and to understand it. If you are listening that low, and for those of us here, it might be like 15 dB lower. If you've got a marking on your monitor level. Once you do that, if you can still understand the voices and you can still hear the music, or you can still hear the ambi underneath, odds are you've got things at a pretty good balance. If that music totally disappears, depending on the style of the production, depending on the creative intent in that section, you might choose to raise the music up. It's just a good judge to try to determine, okay, when I get in a noisier environment, am I going to be able to hear the music or the ambi underneath the voice? It's a great, great technique to figure that out. So let's transition now into a few common problems that we find when we're mixing that we think that we want to try to help you solve.
Now, we brought some tape to play for you guys and sort of tackle it. And I want to just acknowledge that the tape that we're bringing out is not the best sounding tape. We're all in a moment right now where we're obviously recording interviews over Zoom, or like Report It, or different codecs that just maybe aren't ideal. We're not able to send people into proper studios or even do tape syncs anymore. I mean, I hear that they're happening in creative ways right now, but we're all working with challenging pieces of tape. And his first example is a guy named Steve, and that's where our kind of great shirts come in, say high pass everything. So we're going to talk about the high pass. We did bring props. And as the shirt says, if it's a piece of dialogue, you should high pass it. And a high pass, if you were in Europe, you would likely call it a low cut filter, which makes way more sense. It's cutting low frequencies. Here we say high pass because it's passing higher frequencies, but same exact thing. So typically when I work with a high pass, I'm going to set it at 80 hertz right away. because there's nothing below 80 hertz with a voice that I want to hear. There's nothing going on there except maybe sort of junk and rumble in the room. So let's just listen to Steve first without any processing on, and let's see what he sounds like.
Okay. And we're starting to get thunder here, and so I'm going to actually mute my mic so you don't hear that as well.
You know, you want to get in, rob the bank, leave as little evidence as possible that's going to allow someone like me.
To my ear, I'm hearing kind of like a low end buildup, and I'm kind of really hearing it on some of the consonants as he punches things. So why don't we put in that 80 hertz high pass and see what that sounds like.
And quick note, I'm using a plugin. It's an EQ plugin called FabFilter Pro Q. You can use any EQ plugin to do this. Every DAW these days, if I could actually make this thing work, every DAW these days comes with an EQ plugin, and those EQ plugins all have high pass filters in them. So you don't have to use this one. The concept applies to all of them. Okay, the 80 hertz high pass filter's in.
Okay, so let's listen to that again.
You know, you want to get in, rob the bank, leave as little evidence as possible that's going to allow.
To my ear, I'm not hearing a big change there. There's still kind of that low end, boomy, kind of rumbly vibe coming from Steve there. So I'm going to push it up to 110. Can you do that for me, Rob? So let's listen to that again.
Rob the bank, leave as little evidence as possible that's going to allow some.
Sounded a bit better to me, but let's check the original. Let's bypass this and just compare it. We always want, and this is something you always want to do, is A/B everything that you're doing, just to make sure that you're actually improving things. Am I making this better? Is this really helping? Because, just like the mixing fatigue we talked about earlier, the same thing applies here. As you're starting to clean up voices, you want to make sure you're actually making things better. So let's go back and listen to it without any processing.
And quick note, bypass in Pro Tools means on or off, and other DAWs you might actually see an on or off button. So here it is off.
Rob the bank, leave as little evidence as possible.
And here it is back on with thunder in the background.
Rob the bank, leave as little evidence as possible that's going to allow someone like me to track.
Yeah, so that's better. I probably wouldn't want to push it that much further because we'll start to cut into the quality of his voice, maybe thin him out. But that's where the next step comes in that Rob is going to tackle, which is sort of addressing what we would call low-mid frequencies.
Yeah, so we're going to get into EQing this piece of audio now beyond just a high-pass filter. And when I think of EQing, I like to use my adjectives to describe how the audio sounds to my ear. And then that guides me to where on this, where on the frequency range, the frequency spectrum, that I'm going to make a change. Okay. So in this case, well, let me give you some examples and then we'll talk about this piece of audio. So examples of adjectives might be boomy or bassy. And if I said boomy or bassy, I might be thinking of frequencies between 150 hertz and lower. If I said woofy or woolly or muddy, that might be 150, 200-ish, up to around 500. If you said pinched or nasally, that's like 1K and 2K, and sibilant, bright, maybe piercing, you're up around 3K, 4K, 5K, and higher, okay? So use your adjectives. Michael, in this case, I'm catching you drinking your water there. In this case, how would you describe what this audio sounds like?
To me, it's like a woofy, woolly, muddy thing going on. I think it's got all three of those.
Yeah. So just because you said woofy and woolly, I'm going to start around 200. Okay. And what I'm going to do here, this is an old method for EQing. I'm simply going to increase the level using a fairly wide band on the EQ. And as I listen back to the audio, I'm going to sweep this band from left to right. And I'm going to sweep it within that region I just talked about. So I said woofy and woolly somewhere between like 150, 200 up to 500. So I'm just going to slowly sweep it through that band. And when the woofiness and the woolliness really starts to jump out at me, I know I've kind of zeroed in on that resonance, on where that audio is having that problem. So let's give that a shot. So I've increased the EQ with a fairly wide band, about 6-7 dB. And then I'm just going to sweep as I play. So let's see what happens.
Rob the bank, leave as little evidence as possible that's going to allow someone like me to track you down. If you can get in and get out very quietly and get the amount of money that you want and get away, then you have.
Okay, so I'm hearing it right around 250, 260.
Rob the bank, leave as little evidence as.
I'm hearing that woofy woolliness. So once that resonance pops out to my ear, I'm just going to reduce it a little bit. So remember, this was originally set at 0 dB. It was originally set something like this. So I'm going to turn it down just 2 or 3 dB. Let's do 3. That's usually a good place to start, is 3 dB when I make an EQ change. And now we'll take a listen to it.
Rob the bank, leave as little evidence as possible that's going to allow someone like me to track you down.
All right, we'll quickly A-B it, and then we'll move on to the next problem. So here it is with the EQ off.
Rob the bank, leave as little evidence as possible.
I'm gonna turn it on.
That's going to allow someone like me to track you down. If you can get in and get out.
All right, and always A-B. You know, you make a change, listen to the original, did it get better? Make another change, listen to the original, did it get better?
So the next thing on the list is de-essing. And de-essing is kind of what it says it is. We're addressing sibilants. Now that could be, it's primarily S's, and they're in that sort of harsh frequency range of like 2 to 5K. And, you know, as you listen to something over and over again, that's a sound that can be very harsh and fatiguing. And you don't want to fatigue your audience, so you want to tame some of that sibilance. It's not just S's, though. You hear sibilants sometimes in certain hard consonants, too, like CH sounds, and sometimes with T's. Anything that gets you that sort of kind of feeling. In this case, we like this particular plugin. It's Pro Tools only, but there's some other ones out there. But we'll listen to Dion here in a second. But the de-esser that we really like is called the Massey de-esser. But let's give Dion a listen and see what kind of sibilants he's got.
I started to unpack my bag to get my food out, and my food consists of peanuts and almonds and dried meats and dehydrated
so he's
food.
got some
all
peanuts
lightweight food, high calorie,
dried meats, all of the, you know, places where these S's, that harshness is popping out. And the recording isn't also, you know, it sounds like he's on a codec that maybe wasn't the best. So it's going to help with some of the harshness of that codec as well. But this particular de-esser, it's really kind of nice as you find the frequency of his S's, or that harshness, you'll actually be able to listen to what the plugin is doing. So Rob, can you tackle that?
Yeah. So what we're going to do here is we're going to, again, listen back, and then we're going to make a change to the plugin as we listen to the audio. And once the plugin finds the S's that we're trying to reduce, we're going to stop. So a de-esser works, most of them all work in a very similar way. This particular one, when I grab this frequency knob, the only thing we're going to hear is that frequency on up. And what we're going to try to do is slide this knob down. If I can get it to go. We're going to slide this knob down until the S's, the starts to appear. And once we think we've finally got them, I'm just going to stop. And then we're going to listen to the audio that's been de-essed. Most every de-esser works this way. Michael, you might have mentioned another one called FabFilter DS.
That's a great one. And then I saw in the chat, people are bringing up the Isotope RX suite has a de-esser, which also is very good. We'd recommend all three of those, actually.
Yep. So let's take a listen here and see if we can get some of these S's out.
I started to unpack my bag to get my food out.
So now I've grabbed the knob, so you're only going to hear the S's. Starting to get there.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like you might be right about there. We might push it a little too far.
Yeah, and I know I'm going too far because I've got that in there now. Let's try it, moving it back.
I started to unpack my bag to get my food out. My food consists of peanuts, almonds.
How's that sounding to you?
Yeah, that sounds pretty good.
Okay. Let's listen to it now with the de-esser in and the S's kind of tamed a little bit.
I started to unpack my bag to get my food out, and my food consists of peanuts and almonds and dried meats and dehydrated food. All.
So yeah, and we'll bypass it real quick.
Yeah, let's do that.
I started to unpack my bag to get my food out, and my food consists of peanuts and almonds and dried meats and dehydrated food. All lightweight food, high calories.
That sounds a little better to my ear.
Yeah, just taking some of the, all we're trying to do is take some of the edge off. And you need to be really careful with this tool. We found a frequency we like, and maybe if we want a little bit more reduction on this particular plugin, we can just push that amount of reduction. But you want to be careful when finding that harsh frequency, because if you push it too far, you can often make someone's S's turn into F's, or, just really round out their consonants in an unnatural way. And you want to be super careful when using one of these things. But that's, and we've all done it when we've been super tired and come back to something and be like, oh yeah, that's not an F, that's an S. So just one little note there.
Nice. And I want to go back and revisit this idea that Michael talked about a second ago, which is that, the audio we've picked here is really common, especially right now with everyone doing remote interviews. It doesn't sound great. Right out of the gate. It sounds okay. It sounds fine, but it doesn't sound like our host does, who was recorded in a studio with a really nice large diaphragm condenser microphone and some really expensive gear. It doesn't sound like that, and it's not going to. And no matter how much effort Michael and I put into this audio, it's never going to sound amazing, right? And a lot of our work is making compromise. And the things that we have to do with audio like this, we know we're not going to make it sound amazing, but we can make it sound better. And we're going to focus on the problems that we hear. And the two problems that we've just outlined for you are really, really common problems. Three problems really, but two of them kind of fall in the same boat. Low end resonance and just too much low end. And then the sibilance. And with these 2 or 3 tools here, you can tackle those things pretty easily. So let's quickly review what we've done at this point, and then we're going to pivot over into talking about organization. So, so far we talked about organizing your session top down and left to right. That'll help you speed up your work. You'll always know where your audio is. You're also going to do that because you're going to mix how you organize, right? If you notice, we organize things host, guests, music. We're going to mix in that same way, right? Top down. You're going to focus on the transitions as you mix. That's where we're really going to hear the differences and the inconsistencies. Use a high pass for low frequency problems. And as our shirts say, I would say, if it's a dialogue, high pass it, period, end of story.
Always.
Always. It solves a lot of problems, and it's so easy to use. If you're EQing and you're struggling a little bit, use your adjectives. Let your adjectives guide you towards where that EQ decision needs to be made. And finally, de-essers can help you tame those harsh consonants and those S sounds that can be problematic.
So I'm going to go ahead and steal the screen here.
Okay.
If it will let me do that. Yes, I want to continue, and I'm going to just share a little window here. And you can see that, Rob?
Yes.
Okay. So I know we're kind of booking through time here, and we want to have some time for Q&A. So I'm just going to roll through some file management stuff as quickly as I can. So a little while back, a few years ago, I was working at the New Yorker Radio Hour as the technical director, and I set up a whole bunch of systems, and some of them were pretty simple. If you were a producer, and I think they still use this, they'd have a folder with their initials. So call this person Michael, and they'd have a folder called Pieces in Progress, or their PIP. I used to love making Gladys Knight references in the PIPs. And a mix folder. So the PIPs were their pieces in progress. So everything that they were working on. In this case, there's just two things in here. There's an interview with David Remnick. That's the slug for that interview. And if I open that up, you'll see a naming convention in here. And I love this naming convention. You can find one that works for you, but I like a 4-digit year, month, 2-digit month, and 2-digit day. And then the slug, and then a version number. And a new day would get a new date, and a new save as would always get a new version number. And if we look in the audio files folder for this session, you're going to see files that follow that same convention. And if you've ever worked in Pro Tools, and some other DAWs do this too, when you name a track, once you punch record, it's going to name your file that same thing. So you always want to name your tracks before you actually punch record, so you can have organized files that you can find later. You don't want a bunch of tracks that are called Host 01 or Guest 02 or Guest 05. You'll never find your things 20 years later. And I've just had to search a bunch of archive to find stuff from 20 years ago, and I easily found it because I kept myself well organized. So that's something to think about. The mix folder, since we were working as a team, when something was ready for me to mix, they'd move it into their mix folder, and I'd grab it from there, and I'd move it into my whole system per episode. And I had all my deliverables organized. I had the whole big show where all the pieces would be imported into, all the individual things that I grabbed from the producers. And you'll see they all follow this same convention. And once I dig in there, they're all named the same thing. And if you're a producer on staff and you were kind of slacking, you'd hear about it from me. But here's all the tracking sessions and some underwriting. And I just want to show another quick example.
Michael, I'll interrupt you just for a second. I was just chatting with Michelle, and we're going to go just a little long because we're starting to run up against time.
Okay.
So we're going to go a little beyond the top of the hour so we can answer questions. We got a lot of questions in the Q&A.
Okay,
so,
great.
I would say, take your time, and I just want folks to know that we're also going to get to their questions too.
Okay, great. So that's one way of doing things. And I just want to make a point here. As long as you're consistent, that's all that matters. Whether you want to put the date at the end, want to put it in the middle, whether you're going to use version numbers like I did, as long as you have a method and you follow it every single time, you're going to be able to find your work. I find that having the date at the very top or at the very end is probably the most useful, but that's just me, and I do have lots of opinions. Here's an example of something that we worked on with Radiolab. They were growing and having a lot of folks working remotely. This was before our COVID time, and we were kind of building out a Dropbox system for them. But they had a very particular folder structure, which I'm not going to get into, but it's a lot of stuff. Every time they make a new episode or new story, they build all of these folders right away, and I actually wrote them a little script that they can launch. And every time they start something, they build all these folders. And I just bring this up because they've got a lot to organize, and everyone on their team collaborates with each other often. So they need to even find things amongst each other's stuff all the time. And having the same structure for every single person on that staff is so important for them. So in that case, it's like they don't even have to think about it. They run the script, it builds all these folders, it names everything for them, and they kind of get working. So it's something to think about. Just like templates with the Pro Tools sessions or whatever your DAW might be, thinking about folder structure is the same thing. And that leads me to my last point, which is about storage. Right now, storage is cheaper than ever. It's going to continue to get cheaper. And this is a simple thing you can do. Have a hard drive that you work on, that's your production drive. Have a backup for that. I mean, have a backup for every single drive that you work on, first of all. But you should have a production drive with a backup that has a backup, and then an archive drive. You know, in the case of something like The New Yorker or any other radio show or podcast where there might be reruns, you're going to archive all your stuff in a way where you can go in and find that stuff whenever you need to access it and find it easily. I know all the projects that we work on, whether it's Fiasco or This Is Love or Criminal, there's an archive for all of this material that we can dig back into. But having a backup is extremely important. One easy offsite backup you can also have, this is in addition to what's on your screen right now, not in lieu of, but in addition to, is having some sort of online cloud backup. In our case, we really like Backblaze for the one reason that they allow external drives to be backed up. Some of these cloud services, they don't kind of build that into their base package. So I forget what Backblaze costs a year, but I have something like almost 10 terabytes of data on their server that I'm paying the same amount that somebody who's got maybe 500 gigs on their servers. So it's nice to have that easy offsite backup that kind of runs in the background, and you just need to kind of check your files up against their system every 30 days so they don't kind of pull them from their service. But that's my kind of last big note is have some backups.
So you're just to quickly recap that, you're saying for each of these purposes, you've got a primary hard drive and a backup hard drive, a physical drive. I should go back there and grab some drives and hold them up. Physical drive, so 2 for each purpose. And then you're using Backblaze, you're plugging those hard drives into your computer, and then Backblaze is uploading those drives to the Backblaze service. So you've got 2 physical copies, and you've got everything also stored in the cloud.
And I've got a bunch of drives in my father-in-law's house. So, you know, I'm not saying you need to go to my father-in-law's house, but you might also want to have a physical offsite as well. So something to think about. I will not be putting my father-in-law's address in the chat, but yes, but that's what I'm saying.
Nice. So that concludes our presentation, I guess, portion of the webinar. We've covered a lot of territory. I think we've got a lot of questions in the Q&A. Let's see here. It is 11:55 my time. Why don't we say we're going to go to 10 after in the Q&A section? Would that work for you, Michael?
Yeah, that works for me. That's great.
Okay.
Hopefully no leaf blowers show up in suburban New Jersey where I am. So.
And I'm just looking for my Q&A window here to get that back.
Great, and thanks for the extra time, gentlemen. I'll let you pick the first question if you like.
Sure. Michael, can you grab a question? I'm struggling to get the window up.
Yeah, sure. So one of the first ones that came in, I think, is an interesting one. Is someone asked, why do you give every music cue its own track? And I know that's come up so also with the host tracks. You know, in that case, we're talking about matching different days and different takes. We often separate music cues because we're treating that music differently. Maybe we are EQing things differently. Maybe we're processing things differently. And, you know, 15 music tracks isn't that much, so it's not going to stress our system. So we're not going to run all this automation to make those changes every time a new music cue comes along. It's just a little faster for us to work that way.
Okay, I'm just going to stop my sharing here. Now I can see what I need to see. Someone else had asked, hey, can you run through the mapping of the adjectives to the frequencies? I actually put a link in the chat that is a guide from NPR training that I wrote with them a couple years ago about mixing. And it includes that mapping. You've got a little image in there that shows you images against frequencies. Let's see here. Another question here. What levels do you start with when you're recording voiceover? For loudness, I like to go for -24. And that's regardless of whether I'm going to do something for radio or whether I'm doing something for podcasting. I'll have to bump it up for podcasting later, but I like -24 LUFS on a loudness meter because it gives a lot of headroom. When we speak, there's a lot of transients, and you want room in your recording so that you don't clip, you don't peak, right? So -24 is a pretty good spot to do that. And Jameson asks, would you recommend recording with a high pass? Well, high pass everything, Jameson.
There's actually a high pass engaged on this mic right now.
So. Yeah, and I've got one on this mic right now too. And if you can enable it on the mic, that's the best place to do it for a number of different reasons. But I would recommend doing it at the mic if you've got the option. You might have a little switch there. You switch on or off. It'll look like a little hockey stick, just like is on my t-shirt. Or if you want to do it in post-production, you can do it there too. But yeah, do it in recording. That's great. And I'll do another one and then I'll hand it off to you, Michael. John asks, do you have a favorite breath reduction technique? Yes, it is delivering the track or delivering the narration with controlled breathing. I have yet to really find a plugin that does it in a natural way. And I would say, learn to deliver your narration, maybe take some vocal coaching lessons and learn to control your breathing. Not like I'm doing right now, because I'm not used to doing this, but learn to control your breathing in a way that it sounds natural and it sounds okay on a microphone.
And one of the questions that came through was, where do we get those t-shirts?
Michael.
Just Google high pass everything. There's a number of places that seem to believe in this concept. So
excellent, thank you.
So I'm just trying to see. Someone asked, let's see, about mouth clicks, and this is actually I'm bringing this up. Someone said, "How can you get rid of mouth clicks?" So this is one of my favorite things to talk about. And you might have seen me tweet about not drinking a gallon of buttermilk before you go into the studio to track anything. Anything, and this is, again, we always like to solve problems at the recording side before you get into the post-production side. So first, I'm just going to say a vocal coaching and vocal technique is really, really important. We can't stress that enough. I know it's an investment for a lot of people, but the more time you can spend up front working on that, the better. But also being aware of what you do before you go into the studio. So I remember working with a host who loved to come in with a cup of coffee with milk in it right before that host went to track. That was a big no-no in my book, and that didn't happen. So it was like water or nothing. But no dairy, you don't want to eat your lunch right before you go in and track. Or if you're going to eat your lunch, I know it's crazy, sounds crazy, but go floss and brush your teeth before you go track in the studio. Rob currently works at American Public Media, and I used to, and did some work with Marketplace. And not surprisingly, Kai Ryssdal, before he goes into the studio, before the PM show every day, brushes his teeth. I think he also just likes to have clean teeth, but I know it helps his delivery. But if you do have someone who's sort of got that sticky, clicky thing happening, there are some tools out there. Isotope actually has a couple of different declick modules. One is like a declick, a decrackle, and they even have a mouth declick. I will just flash the warning of like danger, Will Robinson here with these tools. Just like a de-esser, you can kind of really make someone sound super unnatural if you overdo it. So these are tools that you're going to want to play with. you're really going to want to experiment with. Everyone's voice is going to react to these things. They are not a silver bullet. You kind of just need to get a feel for them and work with them, because you can really do some horrible things to people's consonants and make them sound not human at all. So the tools are there, but practice on them before you put them to air. So that would be my 2 cents on that one. Anything else jump out at you while I was ranting, Rob?
I still employ the trick of just cutting them out too.
Yes.
So sometimes if a click happens, in the middle of a breath or something like that, sometimes you can get in there and just cut it out and off you go.
And honestly, you can zoom in down to right just before the sample level. And even in the middle of a word, if you just cut out one cycle where that click is, odds are it's going to be a natural edit. It doesn't always work, but you can certainly cut them out in the middle of words as well.
Yeah.
So
I've seen a lot of questions about sort of order of plugins and order of processing for dialogue. And I'll kind of sum it up my thinking this way. I typically will do denoise first. That's the first thing I'll do on a track if it's required. I think because we have access to a lot of tools now, we like to use a lot of tools, and it's not always necessary. So I put a close ear on the audio and I go, okay, is the background noisy? If that clip ends, am I going to notice that the background sound has changed in a significant way? And if it's not significant, I won't use denoise. So my first thing will be denoise. The second thing will often be a de-esser. Just get rid of those S's right out of the gate. Then I'll EQ. So high pass and low mid reduction usually. And then I'll compress. And these days I'm not compressing very much. I'm really light on the compressor, maybe 2 to 3 dB. Sometimes on really transient, really folks who really project, it might be 3 or 4 dB with a low ratio of like 1.5 to 1, somewhere down in that area. And that's been working really, really nicely for me. So I'll say it one more time: noise reduction, DS, EQ, and compression. If I've got to do mouth declick or something like that, it's usually before the compressor.
And some folks, there are a lot of people who love the DS after a compressor, but that's all kind of taste. We both kind of feel like get rid of it before you're going to send that audio into a compressor. Deal with some of those problems before you put it into a compressor. And you could do it before and after if you feel like it really needs it. I've certainly done that on occasion, but it's super rare. But usually deal with all of the flawed stuff before you push it into something that's going to accentuate some of those things.
Yeah.
So what else can we tackle here?
Well, here's one. Laura's asking, I found that when I'm mixing with my headphones, the music levels sound great. But then when I listen to an episode on my phone, the music is way too quiet. Any thoughts on how to account for that difference? Yeah, mixing in headphones versus mixing on speakers. You didn't ask about speakers, but I like to go back and forth. I've got a set of speakers here up next to my screen on either side of the camera. And I'll mix on speakers and then I'll listen on headphones. And it's all a compromise. It's going to sound really great on headphones, and then you're going to listen on speakers and you're going to go, oh, that's not loud enough. And then you're going to get it perfect on the speakers, and then the music's going to be too loud in your headphones, right? So it's going to be a compromise between the two. And then that trick I shared earlier about turn your listening level way down and see how the balance is with the listening level way down. That'll help you make that decision too. And that rock and roll mixing trick, turning it way down, that works on headphones or on speakers. You can do it either way, and I use both.
And there are, and I don't have any on the tip of my tongue, but there are a couple of plugins out there that actually do some sort of impulse response, like emulation of different speakers, like phone codecs, and that you could put on the master fader and try and simulate what it sounds like to play back out of an iPhone speaker. I don't know how great they are, but there are a couple of things out there that exist. But also, Rob, wasn't there something that you used that you could also just feed a final mix through a iPhone? Wasn't there something that...
Yeah, I can't remember the name. Oh, Audrey.io. AUDREIO, I think.
I mean, and they're all tools that can try and help get you there to simulate those kind of things. Um, but the only other thing I want to bring up in this answer is don't mix in headphones with super loud listening volume, because that will always skew your mix. I think there's so many times where people, and I remember this like over the years just working in public radio, like walking over to a producer's desk and putting their headphones on because they're asking me to listen to something, and immediately wanting to rip those things off my head because they were so loud. And I'm like, how do you do this all day long? So listen at a conservative level because your mixes will be better for it as well. And also you'll maintain your hearing over the years as well.
Agreed. A lot of us like to use the Sony MD7506 headphones. Those are great. They're great for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is you can hear a lot of detail, especially in dialogue editing. But I can't tell you the number of times I've walked up to a producer or to even another audio engineer, and I can hear everything that they're listening to loud and clear because they're listening so loudly. You got to really, really be careful with that. There's another question here. Ted is asking us to explain our hardware interface for writing levels. And Michael, I'm actually going to show mine. I don't know if you can show yours. This is a Avid product. It's got 8 faders on it. It's not cheap, but I like it because it really speeds up my workflow. And you can see it's got a fader on it, and when I move the fader up and down, it controls the automation in Pro Tools. And for me, that works really, really nicely. If you're really jonesing to get a hardware interface or a hardware mixer, control surface is what it's called. If you're really jonesing to get one, Michael's got one that's a pretty good cheaper
this is the cheapo version, which is a PreSonus fader port. Now they have a more modern version of this. But this is just one fader. It works with most DAWs, and I actually use this all the time, and I'm just going track by track, assigning it to what I need to assign it to. So unfortunately, I don't have all the faders that Rob does, but for I think most of the work that folks would be doing in terms of podcasts, it's pretty inexpensive. I want to say the version that's out now is like maybe $120, and it'll get it done for sure.
Let's try to squeeze in 2 more questions. We got 1 more minute here. I think we can do it. Ted asks, any tricks for eliminating plosives in post? I'll throw up 2 ideas. One is you can just cut them out, right? Edit them out. Secondly, Isotope's deplosive plugin works really well. I don't use it as an insert, so I don't apply it to all of the audio. I only apply it to just the popped portion, or just the plosive of the letter P. So I zoom in really far, and I wish we had time I could actually show you. I zoom in really far. I find the plosive. It's always got a distinct kind of curved shape to it, and I'll apply the deplosive plugin to just that, not the letter P, but the plosive that comes before it. So cut it out or use the deplosive plugin.
And you want to be really careful with when you're cutting it, that you're still getting that the sound of the P. You're removing the plosive, but you're still getting the sound of the P. But you know what really also helps? If you don't have that nice deplosive module that Isotope comes with, is a high pass filter. So something like an Audio Suite plugin where you can take a high pass filter, just go over that P, high pass that P, and then crossfade around it will also sometimes be a bit more natural than cutting the whole thing out. But just to stay on brand with the whole high pass everything, it's a thing.
And the very last question, someone, I'm sorry, I don't have the Q&A window in front of me. Someone asked, do we normalize our final file, our final bounce to -3 before publishing? And the answer to that is no. I actually use a loudness normalizer, and I let the loudness normalizer normalize. It basically just turns the whole mix up a little bit, and it goes to whatever the deliverable needs to be. So certain networks request certain loudness levels. Common levels are -18 LUFS or -16 LUFS. I really prefer -18, the lower. It usually sounds a little better to my ear. But I'll let the loudness normalizer do that work for me. I'm not using a peak normalization tool, which I think you might be referring to. All right. I think we're done. We're a little over time that we said we do. Thank you for your patience. I'm glad we could get so many questions. Again, I'm Rob, and this is Michael, and you can follow us on Twitter. Our handles are there on the screen, and you can also follow Final V2. It's just at Final V2. Super simple. Thank you to Michelle. Thank you to the Podcast Academy for having us. This has been really awesome. Really appreciate
You guys were fantastic. Thank you both so much. And I did put in the chat box that we have recorded this webinar. It'll be available on the podcastacademy.com website later this week. And there's joining information and everything on our website. So we thank you both. You were fantastic. And obviously we saw that from the number of questions that came in.
All right, great. And remember, high pass everything.
Exactly. All right. Take care, everyone. And we hope to see you on another event soon.
Bye.
Bye.